Think of it as in the past, it was like a person picking up a phone call. Yeah, we'll send some help and hanging up. And today, where it's more like the bridge of Star Trek, right? Like you have someone sitting there and there's just screens, and every piece of data that you can find that's being captured out in the field is being brought into these command centers.
Welcome to Richard Haw's YouTube channel, which looks at what we can do today to make Hawaii Island a more sustainable place to live so our children and grandchildren and their grandchildren won't be priced out of here and will be able to stay in Hawaii and live good lives here. Today we are joined by Kazuo Todd, who is our Hawaii County Fire Chief. He's been Fire Chief since 2021 and with the Hawaii Fire Department since 2004. Welcome, Chief Todd. It's nice to meet you. We're happy to have you with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
You are someone who definitely has a finger on the pulse of what's going on in our community, and it's great to have a chance to talk.
Chief Todd, I'm curious as to the new emergency call center, and maybe you can explain to us how it fits in the whole picture.
So our new emergency call center is actually going to be combining two pretty old call centers. So our island runs a primary, secondary PSEP, as we call it, and police had their call center, and then fire had our own call center. And our call center essentially handled the fire and medical calls, and police handled the police calls. There's a far more calls actually coming in for police than you get for fire or medical. And then a little bit behind that, we have medical calls because people aren't feeling well. And then at the very small end is actually like actual fire calls, because the fires aren't actually something that happens on a, very frequent basis. I think we currently run about 1,000 fire calls a year. So there's about 3 a day, but a lot of those are minor calls, like there's something burning on the stove or something like that. So we came in and maybe put out that chicken that you cooked a little too long or something like that. That's kind of how our current setup is now. Those two different centers are going to get combined into one center, which is a new building. And actually, Mayor Kim was the one that initially had those designs put together, I want to say like 25 years ago. And then when he left office, that project was supposed to continue on during Kanoe's tenure as mayor. But due to other things going on in parks and some other work that needs to be done, it kind of got shelved. And so it wasn't until Harry Kim came back for his second run as mayor for another 4-year term that project got reprioritized again and pushed through to kind of towards the end of his term. And then during Mitch Roth's term, it was being built, and now under our current mayor, it has finally been opened. And so actually, just as we're talking, last night we switched over around like 1 or 2 a.m. Because we want to do it when the lowest possible traffic in case it doesn't work was when we actually did the changeover. And around 4:30 in the morning, it was successful. Things were working and we moved everything over. And so as of today, this is the first day we're actually working out of that facility.
Oh, that's great. So it was a smooth transition then.
So far, everything is working. It's going smoothly, and we're operating out of our new call center.
What problems does this eliminate? What wasn't as efficient, or, what's better about this facility?
I think the concept of dispatching for emergencies has changed over the last couple of decades. Nowadays, if you guys go to Honolulu and you want to catch a cab, oftentimes people are going on their phone and there's an app and they order a Lyft or an Uber or something like that. And actually, when I was up in San Francisco over the winter for a small vacation, I actually caught one of those self-driving vehicles. A Waymo is what they call it. So, the world's changing, right? And so some of that is, we're trying to keep up with the times, making sure that things are going well and we have the best technology and that, it's integrated. But some of it was just because our existing centers had been in, little pocket basement rooms for like the last couple of decades. And as, call taking has changed, the technology and the amount of stuff that we have to use to keep up with things has also changed. In the past, 911, the number was actually 0, right? So you'd push 0, ask the operator, and the operator for the telephone company was actually your 911 operator back then, and would like, well, yeah, we'll call the fire department. And then they hung up the phone, and then they called the fire department, and they're like, hey, there's a fire on old, Dell's farm or something like that. And then, the fire chief's like, all right, yeah, we'll follow the smoke, and then they're going, right? But since then, GPS has kicked in. We have cameras all over the place. Traffic signals oftentimes have camera systems. Recently, Hilo had invested in AI camera detection. So cameras are being placed on some of our really tall towers all over the island. So we're able to get real-time data on like what is going on as the things are happening, right? And so these kind of additional feeds of information need a place to come in, need to be visualized inside the room so we can see what's going on. Some of the things that I saw when I was running our fire and EMS dispatch was that we started adding in our GPS tracking of our helicopter units so we could see where our helicopter units were flying. Recently, in the last year or so, we've implemented our drone program. So we're now able to send drone footage back into our EOCs along with Hiko's video footage and everything else. Think of it as in the past, it was like a person picking up a phone call. Yeah, we'll send some help and hanging up. And today, where it's more like the bridge of Star Trek, right? Like you have someone sitting there and there's just screens, and every piece of data that you can find that's being captured out in the field is being brought into these command centers. And more, I think that's the direction the future will go, where what will happen is there's someone going to be sitting remotely watching as things, happen and making sure that the response we have is adequate for that particular issue. So the idea behind it is that if we get a call for a fire, we can bring up the video feeds and go, oh yeah, there's some dark smoke. It is a working fire. And the appropriate number of fire engines are immediately dispatched, as opposed to sending one person or 500 people without really knowing what we're going to get when we arrive. And so it's an ability to get the right resources to the right problem at the right time to these centers. One of my big pushes was I wanted video walls. So if you've ever gone into stadiums to watch a football game or something like that, they usually have these huge video screens. And what they are, they're just televisions that don't have a frame, kind of slapped next to each other oftentimes. And there's different technology. I'm not going to make it quite that simple because they got to survive the rain and other things like that. But they have the ability to create, video walls. And as big as you want, they can make these things. But it allows us to have interactive displays that show anything that we think is pertinent at the time, from video footage, from, potentially, eventually, the cameras that our police officers are going in with. Theoretically, those things could be streamed back in so that they're watching the operation as it unfolds, to, my drone footage in real time, to other things like that. And then we can make decisions about what resources to send, when to send them, how much help people are going to need, and everything else. Also, to, think about like natural disaster side of things. We'll be able to sit in there and watch the tsunami come in, figure out where we want to do, what people need to be helped, where resources need to be sent, where is the flooding happening. So more and more real-time data, better decision-making, better emergency response for the County of Hawaii.
Wow, that's cutting edge. The amount of technology that has changed in the last, 20 years.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, when we, I think, designed the plans for this building, they didn't have cell phones yet. So definitely some pivots had to be made to make sure that we're incorporating better technology. I think technically right now we're still waiting on some installs of cell phone carrier type signals inside the building, because the concrete does block cellular signals, and we designed it cellular times.
Right.
So definitely we're still working on addressing some of the issues that have come up because of design choice and whatnot.
And I think I read that it's designed to withstand hurricanes and earthquakes, so it's a very solid building. So that's good foresight too. We need a good emergency center that works while the disaster is happening.
Definitely. It's kind of become the norm, is that, we want our emergency services to survive through an emergency so they can continue to serve after the emergency. And so, even for the fire department, we've been looking at, relocating our 2 stations that are in the tsunami inundation area. And then how do we have facilities that are sort of designed to be robust, have backup, power and other things like that. And then also get into the long-term service aspects, like if the worst happens, what are we going to do? And so actually the fire department does run drills on this a little bit. We have our continuing operations plan known as a COOP, and every 6 months we've been practicing it. So basically, someone walks down the hall in admin ringing a bell saying hurricane's coming, tsunami's coming, whatever, and everyone picks up and we shut down administration and we move. Kind of the intent behind that is to practice, like, what if a tsunami alert comes in right now? Are we prepared to make sure that the fire department continues to run even though everyone else is freaking out? The fire department has to be functional. There has to be non-break-in service no matter what is happening. And so for that reason, we actually are exercising every 6 months, like the administration itself relocating to another facility, and then we were working on backup other locations and things like that, just in case our primary backup goes. I think the next one we're going to do, which is secretive, so don't tell my employees, but we'll be planning for a little bit longer term tsunami hit. So for example, if we actually get hit with like a 1960s 1946 52 type tsunami that wipes out large amounts of residential homes or things like that, what would actually happen? How would we address it from a the fire department's perspective, what are our response plans and everything else. So we're gonna do a deep dive 6 months from now. We're in the planning stages right now as we plan for having the most resilient and robust fire department that we can put together for Hawaii County.
That's pretty impressive. I find it so very comforting, put it that way, thinking about the future. This is great.
It is reassuring. Did I also read that the central fire station is about to be renovated?
Right now, we're in the process of moving our personnel out of Central Fire Station. There's some safety issues. I think, haven't done the greatest job of maintaining our existing facilities in the county. It's not just fire department, it's fire, police, parks and whatnot. We've spent a lot of money on maybe new projects or other stuff. In the meantime, some of our wastewater and police and fire stations have kind of run under a little bit. And so we're a little bit behind the 8 ball, I think, as far as that goes. So right now, one of the big pushes right now is my Central Fire Station has some safety issues and plumbing and other stuff like that. So we have a warehouse that we've converted into a temporary fire station. It used to be the previous YWCA location over on Kilauea, right across from the Mormon church. And then we'll be moving our personnel over there. And then we can go back in and address the safety concerns within Central Fire Station. Long term, I still want to actually move Central Fire Station up the hill, as they are technically in the GAT tsunami zone. So if we did get like a decent tsunami, potentially we would lose Central Fire Station, or at least, we'd have some significant issues with it in terms of power and everything else. So I don't know that it would be a functional building after a tsunami. So our goal long term is to try and move it up the hill, find a new location, design a new building, and then get that going. And the reason for that would be essentially that should we have the worst event happen, in terms of a tsunami that wipes out Hilo or something like that, that the fire station would still be functional, have power, be able to service the community and things like that. So that's one of the two stations. The other one is out in Kilkaha, our Waikea fire station, which is near the docks, which is also in the tsunami area. And we're currently exploring some options within the military base at the airport as a potential new location to relocate that facility so that we're a little bit farther away from the shoreline as well.
Right. That one is really, if I were emperor, I would do that one first.
No, I wish for that wand of unlimited money one of these days. If someone can tell me where it is, I would love to swing it a few times.
Yeah. Yeah.
I went to the Pequot conference in 2007, and then I realized that we were increasingly dependent on fossil fuels, which is a declining resource over time. And so the implications are that if we're depending on it and we are out here in the middle of the Pacific, what can we do to make ourselves more resilient? So it comes in a three-part picture. One is geothermal, because it'll last for 2 million years. 2 is food security, and 3 is growing bamboo to replace wood so that our houses can be built from stuff that's grown here. Yes, so 3 things. Now, and my question is, as we're trying to achieve that, and we're trying to make life safer for us here, what do you think about something like that?
I think it's very important. So in my role as the fire chief, my goal is to make a robust and resilient fire department. And you think that maybe that the line stops at the edge of the fire department, but the reality is that it doesn't. And so as weird as it gets, as a fire chief, I get a little bit political. There's a lot of people out there pushing, like, for example, like the short-term rental things through VRBO and whatnot. And I'm not against the concept of having a spare bedroom and renting it out or things like that. Or, having some of these older homes in Hawaii where, you're upstairs and then you kind of convert the downstairs into some units that you rent out to students or things like that. But I am against the concept of, there's a lot of corporations in the mainland that have a lot of money from the stock market, and they'll buy up entire tracts of homes and then turn them into VRBOs or things like that. And it essentially takes normal communities and turns them into essentially what our resort areas are, right? So you lose the community, you lose the people living there, you jack up the rates of things. And this applies to the fire department because I need to hire people, and those people need to live on this island. So an affordable place to live, affordable homes, affordable rent, and food to eat, and all of those things matter. It's kind of weird because, I never thought as the fire chief I would have to take a stance on like short-term rentals or get involved in the politics of that, or, think about food security or even energy. I actually had dinner with Shili Kimura, who's the head of Hiko, and we were talking about, energy resilience for this island. I actually spoke at one of the energy conferences over in Maui the other year, talking about like lithium batteries and whatnot. And so, with her, I was talking about, hey, how are things going? And right now, the Big Island pulls about 59% of its energy from renewables. We have PGV, which is a 38 megawatt capacity geothermal site. Our island uses about 180 megawatts a day, and we've added 2 new solar fields out in Kona side that are each producing about 30 megawatts with about 120 megawatts of storage. We have a limited amount of wind, and then we also have some hydro off of Wailuku. And so I was joking with her, like, hey, if the current president wipes out, EPA and everything else, let's just go dam up the river and create a lot of hydro, because it's always raining in Hilo. We could make enough energy off of those to like power all of Hilo, right? But also not kind of joking, because I do worry, right? I think as my role as fire chief, there's a guy, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, and he wrote a series of books called Black Swan, Fooled by Randomness, Anti-Fragile, and whatnot. And what he basically talks about is a lot of times we have these weird economic distribution curves, and he thinks it's a false way of looking at life, because the reality is one event can throw off the entire concept. Your concept of a standard distribution curve is that these 100-year floods, 1,000-year floods, or whatever only come very rarely. But the problem with that model is that 100-year flood, 1,000-year flood, whatever, can wipe out the gains for all 1,000 years in one day. Banks that have been in existence for 100 years have a crisis go on and can wipe out their earnings for 100 years in one day. So the reality is he calls these events like black swans and everything else. And his book on Anti-Fragile talks about how do we build organizations and how do we become basically people that do better after variability and events than something that doesn't happen. So basic concept is, fragile things, when variability kicks in, something goes on, they're likely to break. Resilient things are able to withstand those shocks, but don't get better. Robust things are basically the same, but anti-fragile, which is something he's kind of coined, is he's saying, it's like your muscles. You do a little bit of damage to them, they grow back stronger, right? And so the goal should be that, we have systems in place at minimum to be resilient or robust, but ideally to be anti-fragile, which means that, a little bit of variability, a little bit of trauma, actually we grow back better, we build better, and we have those systems in place to do so. So from the fire chief's perspective, I do consider these kind of things, like how do we maintain a good, vibrant fire department for the service of the public, but consider the fact that like we have to be able to survive a hurricane, a tsunami, or even let's say, we start a war, whether it be a trade war or a physical war, and we are going to go through drastic changes. How do we design a fire department that continues to provide services to the public, that maintains its membership and has enough people to respond, that is going to have the equipment, supplies, parts, and everything else to continue servicing the community? And it goes beyond the borders of a fire department. We have to look at energy resilience. We have to look at food security. We have to look at housing, because all of these things are going to affect my ability as a fire chief to provide a fire department that produces the best possible outcomes for the residents and the people of this island. So my role isn't limited to the edges of the fire department, but food security matters, energy security matters. And these are things where I have to think about, like, how do we get involved? I actually was testifying last week about cellular towers, because there's a contingent that doesn't like 5G. And I'm not an expert to tell you if there's health benefits or, negatives that come with, these radio frequencies or things like that. But there's a group of people that don't like them and are trying to put restrictions. And one of those restrictions I had to go testify on was a 1,200-foot restriction. And that restriction was based off of a concept that, hey, we want to be far away from where these, radio waves are coming out, which is understandable, for people that are afraid of it, right? But from my perspective, you go 1,200 feet in one direction, well, you got to go 1,200 in the other. That's 2,400 feet. And then you go up and down too, which means we now can only place cellular towers on 130-acre parcels. There's not a lot of 130-acre parcels in, residential town areas that have not been cut up into other, units. So in the future, right, as we move forward, we've already stopped watching television for a lot of people. They're streaming on various streaming platforms. We're not listening to the radio. They're listening to Spotify or Pandora, hooked up from their cellular phone into their radio. So our ability to communicate emergencies under our old systems of like taking over the radio or, the television going, and this is an emergency broadcast, is pretty much gone. Like a huge chunk of our society doesn't even, subscribe to those systems anymore. And so, cellular communication matters. There's a current lawsuit in Maui going on because, the cellular network dropped in the middle of this disaster. And so the messages that were coming out of their emergency operations center weren't reaching the people. And as a fire chief, why am I going and testifying about private interest in cellular towers? Well, because it matters. It matters for the people to be able to receive the evacuate now, the tsunami's coming, or the hurricanes, really bad, shelter in place, or, there's a shooter at the school, or whatever that message might be. Nowadays, like the energy or housing or, cellular towers, it all kind of ties back into the services that the Hawaii Fire Department is going to strive to achieve in our service of the public. The better we do, the more resilient we are, the better the public is going to get a good service. So, it all ties back in.
Yeah, that's an amazing overview to see all of that and how it all fits together.
What we want to do is to keep the value in Hawaii and not export the value of, the different things I mentioned to big companies overseas.
You both are covering different angles on all of this, but it all comes to how do we take care of our society?
This is really encouraging. The way you explained it is in such depth. It makes me feel so energized, I guess I should say.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. That was really interesting to hear about what's going on in our community from your perspective. And thanks everyone for watching. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Richard Ha's vlog. Ahuiho.